I've always been in the outdoors. From the age of 3, the police had to bring me back for having wandered off down the boulevard in Winnipeg. Um, I I spent every spare minute I could outdoors. My parents would drop me off at our cabin where there were moose and beaver and wolves, deer, uh, and I would spend the weekend. They'd come back and pick me up. I'd spend summer vacations as much as I could like that. If I wasn't with the scouts on canoe trips, something like that. The same with in the winter, chopping holes in the ice at the cabin while they, for the whole Christmas holidays, and they'd come back and pick me up. I'd keep the wood stove going and listen to the wolves, call the wolves across the ice. So yeah, I've been an outdoor guy. And then the native stories about Sasquatches, Brett, were to me just myth, legend, and folklore to start with. But so I took my anthropology along with my zoology, and some of the profs were saying, well, there may be more to it than just myth, legend, and folklore. Those were the minority profs. So most of the professors at the time would say, this is just myth, legend, and folklore. Others said, no, there are actual tracks, plaster of Paris tracks that Conservation Officer Bob Uchtman at the PAW Manitoba cast. So at Manitoba back in the 70s, it was one government that at the base level, grassroots level, actually started to show evidence before anybody like the feds or the RCMP said, hey, you can't talk about this anymore. Nothing to see here, move along, sort of thing. But yeah, so that's a start. And then Ivan Sanderson, who wrote to me, the Oxford zoologist who wrote Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, the story of subhominids on 5 continents. I loved what Mr. Sanderson did. He was essentially like a PhD with those botany and zoology degrees from Oxford, going around the world, writing 14 books on jungles, and talking about, hey, there are wild hominids like, possibly even Neanderthals still alive. And so I was hooked on that possible idea, but it wasn't until 1973 that I actually started to run into tracks myself in the Canadian Rockies. In 71, I was an intern in Edmonton at a native hospital. I realized I loved working with the natives. I would get straight shots about the anthropology, the ethnography, as opposed to the cultural anthropologists. Oh, that's just a cultural artifact to keep the children inside from. Okay, so no, they're real. These are real beings that come and go from our world. So I'm hearing this, and then I'm seeing tracks. And then in 1970, I guess I was hearing from natives from 74, 75 in Nanaimo. It was 1975. I'd heard so many stories from my native patients who were just being really honest, thanking me for maybe working with one of their family members going through a tough time. It was their way of saying thanks. Oh, he wants to know more about, Quietluck or Squeenus or Papaeus, the Nanaimo people. And I got up on, I don't know why, I picked a weekend trip in the middle of Vancouver Island and had a kind of a weird midnight visitor that I wasn't expecting. My girlfriend, my housemate, his girlfriend. They all only saw it. I was the only one they only heard it. I was the only one who saw it, excuse me. And we all heard it taking off. It was like a D3 caterpillar making, pouring milk in a bowl of Rice Krispies, smash, snap, crackle, pop, over 60 decibels of trees popping like crazy. But I saw what is in this book, illustrated briefly, standing outside my tent in my flashlight beam after I had sort of done okay, buddy, I don't give a shit who your dad is, you're in big trouble now, thinking it was a high school kid that had come up from Campbell River without leaving any tracks. So there I was on the south shore of Upper Campbell Lake on Vancouver Island, just west of Campbell River. And in my flashlight beam, I shone my light on what I expected to be a high school kid playing pranks that had managed not to leave tracks. For the last 10 days, there'd been no rain, and every little mouse and deer and elk track was showing in that fine dust that you find on logging roads on the east side of Vancouver Island and the Olympics. So I'm trying to think, how did this kid get up here without leaving a track? And he's been throwing pine cones or pebbles on my tent every 5 minutes for the last half hour. That was what was bugging me, Brett. And I was saying to him, okay, buddy, I don't give a shit who your dad is. You're in big shit now. I'm just trying to talk like this, but not loud enough to wake Louise. When I shine my flashlight a full 90 degrees to the right, past the tent, the end of the tent, right to where that Douglas fir is, I see a 7.5 foot tall, dark brown, hair covered being that looks just like this at me for 1 second, 2 seconds. 3, he's gone like Russell Wilson in the backfield, like the linebackers are after him. And he is waking everybody up in Arnie's tent, Francine and Arnie, and my girlfriend Louise. They're all up. Oh my gosh, what is that? I said, well, I just saw now this is the first night of a romantic weekend, and I stopped just at the last second. Oh my God, Rob, what are you about to say? I said, oh, let me build up the fire. Listen, is that an elk or a bear? Any elk or bear making that much noise is going to be in Campbell River in 10 minutes, right? We're all listening, agreeing, yeah, it's fading away. So they're all relieved. Oh, listen, yeah, it's fading away. Marnie to Francine to Louise, yeah, it's fading. Well, listen, we'll be okay. Rob, you going to build up the fire? Yeah, I'll build up the fire. I'll stay up. Don't worry. So that was my reason to them for doing that. And it was a valid reason. I was going to stay up and just make sure the fire was okay. But you know what? Having seen what I saw, that big dude, no way I was going back to sleep. No way. It had already caused me, in standing beside the tent when I had the little flashlight, honestly, to void my kidneys and bladder. And there was no way I could go back to sleep. I was kind of shaken. Oh, they're real. This isn't just a face on a totem pole. There's a being like this. And my mind is racing through all my anthropology. Well, Neanderthal. Oh, no, they're European. That's broad and fat. Wait, what's Java man? Oh, they're over across the Pacific Ocean. We don't have anything here. Wait, I'm running out of, it's not a bear. It's no gorilla, escaped gorilla or an orangutan. So I was just totally gobsmacked. And you know, it wasn't until I realized, Dr. Krantz told me, he said, well, we've got some Meganthropus, Homo erectus from Java. He really big, not Gigantopiths big, but really big, would have been maybe 8 or 9 feet, just from the jaw reconstruction. He did a reconstruction, not full size, of a Meganthropus, Homo erectus paleojavanicus from Java. My thought was, holy smokes, if any of these guys got north, up into Siberia during the last 4 ice ages, they're going to double in size, become Sasquatches, and perpetually hate wolves that are trying to steal their winter live or die competitive thing. In fact, that's a crazy theory I've got about wolves, dogs, and Sasquatches, why there seems to be a genetically, yeah. So I've got some crazy ideas, Brett, but there you go. People like Fred Roll will tell you, hey, they're not here for berry pick. You're not going to go berry picking with these guys. They're not friendly up here. And I said to Fred, who's a good friend, Fred, I can't believe that you don't have at least one interaction where they've kind of helped somebody, saved somebody, or there's been something benign. He says, no. Well, one maybe out of how many, Fred? Well, I don't know, 350 or 400, you know. So you'd expect in California, Oregon, Washington, BC, at least one report of a Sasquatch maybe catching a cougar that was about to leap on you and breaking its back and throwing it off the cliff, or carrying you back to camp if you're bit by a rattlesnake. I have something like that from Ontario and maybe a few other places. Actually, that's Rocky Mountain stuff. So you get that, but we don't get that in Alaska, just not there. In North Alaska, well, you'll get gifting down in Southeast a little bit. Not a lot, but you guess, I feel that your Washington, Oregon, maybe even Northern California, Siaticos and stick Indians, and what Professor Ed Fuchs got from the Colvilles, the Squinichti, they walked among us. Those are the hybrids. I feel there's been, I'd agree with Dave Pilati, said it's possible that with a long history of proximity between Sasquatches here in Washington and southern BC, that there may have been almost certainly hybridization. So they've got a different kind of vibe with us than maybe the ones who are 200 miles away and don't want to see us ever again and feel. So yeah, there's no doubt that there's angry stuff in, say, New England and north of Prince William Sound. And Fred, really backs this up. Now, when I was up there, I never had any experiences, but in Alaska I did, in Southeast Alaska I did, not on the Kenai Peninsula. Although I had an invitation to spend a winter at Portlock and see if anything threw rocks at the cabin at Dogfish Bay. If you walk into somebody's house with a rifle, not far from where he's got his kids or he's going to have dinner, you can expect one kind of reaction back. And you'd be lucky if you got up and walked away from it. I don't think Sasquatches abduct people anywhere like, oh, aliens might, I have no doubt that that David Paulides is doing a very good job in exposing what the government really doesn't want you to be discovering about Sasquatches or UAPs. And for that matter, Harvey Pratt's illustrations, forensic officer Harvey Pratt's illustrations of Sasquatches in the Trinity River area in Mr. Paulides' books, Hoopa Project and Tribal Bigfoot, are phenomenal. And they just show more kind of humanity than the illustrations that my former patients and witnesses had in Alaska. Not that these are apes, it's just that maybe they don't have the lighter skin tones that if you know, if your family was living right next to a native village for the last 3 centuries, you might have that. Plus, you have natives in BC and Alaska saying, our great-grandparents traded with some of them. You know, you get that in the carriers. The carrier people, some of my patients from Stony Creek would say, yeah, the Slitlalo were friendly with our great-grandparents before the Hudson Bay Company muskets came, but the Nain were like evil and they're cannibals and everyone's afraid of them. So shorter but broader. So you got these stories, and the Tlinkits have their Kushtakas and their Hutzland, just regular Sasquatch, and their shape-shifting, soul-stealing potential one that even a non-native might describe seeing transform from a Sasquatch into an otter here. I take his story as an officer of the Alaska Marine Highway System seriously. I know him to be an honest guy saying, hey, Rob, I was always thinking flesh and blood, but I can't go there anymore because of what I saw with other people, okay? So you've got this extra dimensional thing. If you have anybody who are cops and they say, any friends who say, you know, Brett, Rob, it just disappeared. It dematerialized when I shot it in a flash. It was just a flash. So, and that's a beautiful kind of flash because you've got energy that you don't have to go digging around for. You know, it's still kicking around. But yeah, so multiple forms of Sasquatches, and The Enemy of Every Tribe is a professional anthropological paper by Dr. Ellen Basso, and it's in JSTOR. And anyone access to university can read her excellent analysis of hairy man across the north and how every tribe was afraid of it or respected it. Which, by the way, if you don't have any trees around to strike, how are you going to make a sound like that? The Athabascans that I encountered would say, well, we think they steal rifles maybe. Okay, so, but I'm thinking, you know, it's more of some, maybe there's some people studying the paranormal saying, if you dematerialize an object, you've created a vacuum, whether you're a grouse's wing, if you're out upland game hunting, and you're going to get a pop like a Bertolli, like a Venturi effect. You'll get a popping sound where that wing was, but there's a vacuum now. You get a popping sound. It's kind of like breaking the sound barrier in a way. Yeah, so they can be doing that or making clicks and pops with their tremendous lungs. Anytime you get a Sasquatch vocalizing at 60 decibels, woo, 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 and it's trying to sound like an owl, but it's way too loud. Picture an owl with lungs the size of a North American bison. You're not going to find that. You know, I've had patients and witnesses say to me, you know, you can tell me them was a screech owl, but if you were going to do that, then that was the biggest goddamn screech owl you're ever going to see in your life. You know. And this is like a camp watcher for a native group up in Alaska who had to stick it out by himself at a native site where they had regular visitation. If you do a vocalization, I have friends who do perfect eagle imitations, the kick sound or whatever, you know, the scream, the screech that an eagle does, and then I complement that with something like. I can do a raven, a fair raven. And well, on a good day, I can get it out a good distance. And I've been in places where we'll get a pop back less than a minute later. I don't hit trees anymore. Who knows what you're saying when you hit a tree? You know, I think I'm just being rude. But it's nice to say, hey, in any way you can. If you're there, can you give me some, say hello if you're there. I mean, I'm kind of there with that. Oh, my 454? Oh, I was just carrying it in case there was a bear that I couldn't, I couldn't keep away from my daughter or someone, or a cougar. I would never harm you, and thank you for letting me be here. We're just here to pick berries, or do some fishing. Okay, so I have three accounts that I'll get to that touch on this shape shifting, okay, and what it's like. But let me jump forward. There's a culture bear that's famous in Native healthcare and education from the Tlingit Nation, First Nation. Um, she's a Mrs. Peratrovich. She's passed on. Beauty's remarkable. Her pictures adorn the wall of many a U.S. Native, Native BIA clinic, in Native clinic, and she had the Peratrovich family are scions of Klawak Tlingit culture. That name's across Alaska, but um, they're all called auntie. Okay, and there's three women that are all culture bears in their own way for the Klawak people. I can think Brenda Lease, Kathy Yates, and Nina Peratrovich or Atlanta Fleury are all wonderful women who embody a lot of the knowledge of Tlingit life ways. And I think Nina summed it up best. She said, I think all of these cousins had an opportunity to ask their grandmother, auntie, because it's ubiquitous in referring to an elder on a native. Everyone's auntie, or a male is uncle. Auntie, are Sasquatches and Kushtakas the same thing? And her response, as my good informant shared with me, was, Nina shared, well, yes and no. Yes and no. Well, Auntie, how can that be? Well, the answer was this: a Sasquatch is a Sasquatch, but a Kushtaka can be anything it wants. So you have that almost Navajo. Here's your parallel, or even the carrier Athabascans who would be saying, well, here's the friendly one that might, the Sleipolol, the big ones that might be just trading with you, trade fish, blankets, you know, venison, firewood, versus the cannibalistic, well, whether they're even in the same dimension, whether they even vibrate in the same way that our molecules vibrate while we're on this earth, until our molecules kind of melt down and we're rearranged, recycled. But the energy is interesting. So that's one point. Now, what were the three accounts? Well, the one that you read about in Brushes with Bigfoot, where my non-native Alaska Marine Highways officer friend said, Rob, never, thanks for signing Brushes with Raincoast Sasquatch, but I want to tell you, something's changed for me. And he recounted the story of this Sasquatch turning into an otter, a big 5-foot long male river otter river otters go in the ocean all over in Alaska. You don't have to be a sea otter. Sea otters are just out eating sea urchins. River otters eat clams, mussels, limpets, everything, fish, everything, crabs. So watch. And he said, you know, there's a paranormal aspect to this now. A transformational otter. He says, Kushtaka, land otter man. He said, with others, I just saw a perfect example of how that can happen. But the Kushtakas will be able to transfer not just into otters, but back into a Sasquatch or into your friend. And I've had a young native man in Saxman describe what he said was a Sasquatch, a white one, or Kushtaka, at the end of a parking lot, transform into his buddy and walk up partway to him, and he freaked out and he got out of there. But this young man wasn't on drugs. And then I think there's another third Kushtaka story. Well, Fred Roll has some interesting things. There's one man who was a senior in Southeast Alaska. Fred has one or two reports from Southeast Alaska in his website, Subarctic Alaska Sasquatch. I encourage people to listen to Fred's particular story. You might have to Google that. It's about an old man who's got a Kushtaka on shore, getting in the water and coming out toward him. Pretty freaky, very aggressive behavior, kind of insidious, and to me, creepy and spooky. I guess I'll have to get back to you with the third one. I'm always flesh and blood. I love doing the hair. My hair went into Melba's program. It came out really nicely sequenced, Melba told me. It came from British Columbia. Big shout out to Bruce McMillan, who worked hard to help get the sample, to me and David Politis, and huge wad of hair. So they got a lot of follicles with nuclear DNA from that. Melody did great work. She got closure for so many people after 9/11, when her particular short nucleotide polymorphism techniques allowed her to identify remains that would have otherwise been completely lost. And I think there was some reaction from the old guard in speaking to the journal Nature, shut her down, shut this paper down, it doesn't belong. I'd have been surprised if a lot of the major religions might not have had somebody saying, hey, you can't publish this, or ivory tower academia, because all it takes is one voice at the top. Thank you for all the grassroots anthropologists I know, like the late Dr. Nelson. Make prayers to the raven, that's something. So what should we do? Well, Cliff, let's see, the Olympic Project, David Ellis is doing acoustic audio stuff. Seems like Sasquatches don't like the infrared. If you're having problems with your cats disappearing, get that infrared on all four corners of your house. If you're not, and yet you don't want to invite them in, and you want to learn more about them, maybe get their audio recorded just to, confirm that they're not a coyote, that they're not a barred owl. And you do that how? By getting a hold of David Ellis of the Olympic Project, or conceivably Chris Spencer, Toutle Valley Bigfoot, Sasquatch, down in Washington as well. And I know that the guy who started a lot of this back in the day up in Wenatchee, I wonder if we want his name, I won't mention it, but these guys can help identify. You've got a Sasquatch that you can identify by a voice print. And I would say, I'm not going to toot my own whistle too much, but in my next book, I'll be talking about all the Southeast Alaska reports that I have been able to get together on a big format, 8.5 by 11, and an anatomy that will account for multiple octaves. When dissecting the human vocal tract at medical school, you can see there's a little set of false vocal cords above your main ones that we're just using our main ones now, Brett, our true vocal cords, a true cricoid and arytenoid cartilages. But Sasquatches may well have the false set that sits up top above them hugely developed. I wouldn't know. The government probably knows. I'm sure U.S. Fish and Wildlife know. I'm sure there's in anatomy labs that you and I are not told about, because the government goes to great lengths to, I think, misdirect a lot of attention here and make it kind of a joke for late night news, and move along, folks, nothing to see. Even the state levels, the nurse in California at San Bernardino State Court, Audrey, with her lawyer, looking across the courtroom at all the U.S. California State Fish and Wildlife lawyers, might have been 6 or 7, her lawyer turning to her and say, Audrey, we can't win this suit. We're outgunned, we're outnumbered. She'd said, I'm suing the state of California for failing to disclose Sasquatch that would be, in the interests of the public safety of residents of California. It was Audrey, I can't remember the RN's name. Audrey Schwartz, Audrey Schultz, something like that. And her daughters, and they had video. So there's that kickback, that really strong kickback. And I encourage people to work at the grassroots level with people like yourself. If there's evidence, get it in front of a camera. But do it before three-letter agencies can train their sniper scopes on Brett and his documentaries. Nothing to see here, folks. I know the U.S. Forest Service is interested in what we're doing. Three-letter agencies, what's the expression? Kick them to the curb, do your thing, record, and keep it below the radar if you like, and do things in first person at conferences. You don't have to be on the internet or online, sharing information.